When I'm live.
You're live now.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and I want to welcome everyone this afternoon to the meeting. We're going to try to get through the material at hand within an hour's time. Hope it doesn't go over too much. We do have a couple of members that couldn't be here today, so let's see what we can do. As you might recall, last week, we voted unanimously that the assessment that we have been talking about should not be used in any funding decision until FY25. There is a letter in your materials that was sent out to the Executive Director Gurrell that summarizes the concerns that we heard last meeting from our LEAs in particular. A lot of our time has been spent understanding the assessment, and the work group does have 3 additional charges that we need to focus on moving forward. For today's meeting, I've asked the IAC to present their ideas on incentive funding for local jurisdictions, which is one of the additional charges that the work group has. After Mr. Rubenstein from DLS presents a number of the decision points related to the revolving fund loan, which is also one of the areas that we are to address. And then Michelle Lambert and Rachel Heiss will present decisions related to the assessment. Although we decided not to use the assessment data in funding decisions until FY25, there are additional choices we may want to make to put guardrails around the assessment data and to keep the IAC and LEAs accountable. Remember, this assessment continues as we move along through till FY25. Because of the number of charges to the work group, and we have a short amount of time left, I would like us to vote and make decisions when we can. But I do understand that we may need more time between now and the next meeting to reach consensus on specific points. So I think we may be ready to make decisions about the revolving loan fund today. But for the assessment decision points, I would like to just discuss those ideas in the DLS document and then vote on as many pieces as we can on our next meeting, which is the 1st of December. At our final meeting, DLS will present all the decisions we made thus far, and any outstanding ones that we need to make, we will make at that time. Does anyone have any questions before we turn to the IAC discussions? Any questions? Okay. I'm trying to get this one thing.
I believe we lost the chair. So I believe Senator McCray, she has appointed you to take over in her absence, and Executive Director Bob Gurrell and IAC is presenting next.
Okay, well, it sounds like we're going to call up Executive Director Gurrell for the presentation.
Thank you, Senator. So with appropriate maintenance and renewals, the expected lifespan of a school facility can be 50 to 60 or even more. Facilities are not set and forget assets. Not only do they use utilities, to remain reliable and fully functional, they require custodial, routine maintenance, and occasional renewal. And I think everybody realizes that. Facilities naturally degrade. And when a facility's average facility condition index exceeds 35 to 40%, as we are currently measuring it in the assessment, emergent repair will begin to increase. And above 60%, they increase significantly, and accordingly, functionality begins to suffer. Foundations will last 100 years or more, but nothing else on a facility. Facilities decay, and without sufficient maintenance, routine and capital, the reliability and function and even the health facilities will become unreliable. 2, capital decisions have a tremendous impact on the operational cost of a facility. We call this the total cost of ownership because you've got to look at these operational costs, not only the first cost. Then as the IAC defines total cost of ownership, it takes into account the cost to plan, design, and construct the facility, as well as the cost to own and operate the facility for 30 years. And that's the boundary that we set to try to do our analysis within. As I said earlier, they can last longer. But typically it's 30 years, just like on a home or the strip mall or anywhere else you go past 30 years and it starts to become unreliable. It doesn't feel right. Your maintenance costs go up. You can see in this pie chart how those costs can break down. And whenever you operate a facility for several decades, it can cost more, that total cost of ownership that includes operation, repairs, replacement of roofs, mechanical systems, routine maintenance. It can exceed the cost of construction. And yet you'll notice that the least costly are planning and design in the total life cycle of a facility. The next slide, please. School facilities ownership is a continuous process, and especially from the portfolio perspective, which all of our LEAs are. They operate more than one school facility. There are 4 phases in a facility ownership, and that is, as you see on this slide, planning, design, construction, and operations and maintenance. And oftentimes these phases overlap with one another. It's critical that the owner drives decisions for all but construction. And you might ask, why not construction? Even though it's the most visible, it's the one that the public really pay attention to. If planning and design are done well, construction will likely also. It's a playbook. You have tradesmen that are following directions that are provided in design documents. And so therefore, if planning and design are done properly, the construction will likely be done properly too, and with good results. And if not, a highly functional and affordable school is not likely. Planning and design are key. Planning provides the project's instructions to the design professional, and the tool we use are educational specifications. They are the instructions from the educator to the design professional. Good planning requires good information, and the master facilities library with its 5 input modules required by statute and is inclusive of the state facilities assessment that we have talked about in this work group. Each LEA, and along with each LEA's unique knowledge of their facilities, all of that information together will drive the solutions that we want. And the innovative solutions are, of course, going to come from the LEAs. They're closest to where the problems are and closest to coming up with the best solutions. The more information that is available, the better solutions can be. Design professionals solve function and affordability problems. That's what they're trained to do, and develop design solutions that require good owner information, however, to get there. And a good educational specification from the owner with clear expectations of scope, budget, and total cost of ownership. And of course, the time of delivery that's so important in planning and education. Allow the design professional to develop design solutions within the owner's expectations and without change orders. Next slide, please. Alex?
Thanks, Bob. Each LEA has a population of students that it must serve and a set or portfolio of facilities with which to serve those students. The first major area of portfolio management is managing the supply of seats against the demand for seats. Every student needs a seat, but seats are expensive to provide, so the LEA will want to have enough seats in the right places, but not so many that limited available resources are being spent on seats that aren't serving students. The second major area of portfolio management is managing the cost of owning the facilities, which includes maintaining them in sufficient condition. It's challenging because when making any decision about the facility, The LEA must consider the purchase, construction, or installation cost, as well as the costs of operating, maintaining, and eventually replacing each given building system and the facility itself. Next slide, please. But it also presents great opportunities too. With many building systems, there are various types available that could be installed, and they often have different costs for installation, operation, and maintenance, as well as different expected useful lifespans. For example, a standing seam metal roof can cost more than twice what a 4-ply roof would cost, but can last well beyond double the 4-ply roof's average lifespan. Next slide, please. Over the average lifespan of a school facility of 50 to 60 years, a 4-ply roof would generally need to be replaced twice. Even without factoring in the higher level of maintenance required by a 4-ply roof, the cost of the 3 installations alone push the total cost of ownership about 50% higher than the metal roof. Going with a metal roof rather than a 4-ply can therefore save the LEA more than a third of the cost of the alternative, thereby freeing up resources that are no doubt needed for meeting other urgent facilities or programmatic needs in the district. Next slide, please. And back to you, Bob.
The power of early decisions. Alex just described how a choice such as a system selection can reduce the total cost of ownership. Higher first cost, but the total cost is the key. Another consideration for reducing total cost of ownership is to consider how much space is really needed to meet occupant needs. This slide provides an example of 2 different design solutions. Both are to accommodate the same enrollment, grades, and programs, but one requires more gross square footage than the other. It's less efficient in its design and less multiple uses of the spaces. Both are to accommodate the same enrollment grades programs, but one requires more gross square footage, and that smaller footprint school has an estimated cost to build that is 8.5 million less than the 90,000 gross square foot school. But more importantly, about 300,000 less to operate and maintain each year between those 2 schools. Ask a facility person how much benefit 300,000 a year would have for each school in a portfolio, and a teacher if it might be worth right-sizing a school if it meant that that amount of dollar could be turned back to the classroom for use there. And a teacher, of course, are interested in that, maybe in some cases more than anything else, that the facility is operating correctly. They have a thermostat on the wall that works, the lighting's well, it's clean, and it's comfortable to be in. Those are the trade-offs. If you have more than you can afford to take care of, no matter how nice it is when you begin, it will degrade if you don't have the appropriate amount of funding to be able to keep that up through the second half of the cost of a facility after the initial construction. Thank you. Alex?
On planning and total cost of ownership, the IAC has put in place a number of tools for LEAs to use that focus on total cost of ownership. You all are, of course, familiar with the sufficiency standards, which identify high priority deficiencies in existing facilities.
Next slide, please.
Thank you. The gross area baselines describe the outer boundaries of facility size that is eligible for IAC participation. It's very important to understand that the baselines can be varied by the IAC for any project when an LEA demonstrates why space above and beyond the baselines is needed to provide for the program. The IAC also created a total cost of ownership comparison tool, which is required to be filled out and submitted alongside a project's educational specifications. And it does a very basic comparison of total cost of ownership against the IAC's baselines. We expect to continue to refine this tool as we work through developing a database of system lifecycle costs, which will become a lifecycle cost estimator.
Next slide,
And now,
please.
thank you.
If we follow the standard funding benchmarks we've been discussing and apply them to the entire existing portfolio of Maryland schools, with 2% of replacement costs per year for capital maintenance and another 2% for routine O&M, it would take around $3.4 billion per year to sustain the current condition of Maryland's total school facilities portfolio. And of course, this is just the cost to maintain it at its current level of condition. To improve conditions would require a larger investment. Next slide. So there are some incentives that we can talk about to help the LEAs improve or maintain that level of condition. Statutorily, there are a couple that are required for us to look at. The IEC is required to establish incentives around net zero school facilities and around the use of energy efficient or other preferred materials. And this work group is required to consider whether the state should provide funding incentives for local jurisdictions that reduce the total cost of ownership that we've been talking about for public school facilities.
On total cost of ownership incentives, IEC staff have presented to the IEC, to the work group on educational specifications, and to this work group last year on a potential incentive that could reward LEAs whose project designs reduce the total cost of ownership below a baseline total cost established by the IEC. The best part about this incentive is that it inherently incentivizes those activities we've already talked about, like choosing cost-efficient systems or energy-efficient materials or net zero energy buildings. But it puts the LEA in control of choosing how to achieve the TCO reduction and gives the LEA the greatest flexibility for innovation that's possible. The second best part is that it results in a huge cost savings for the LEA, as well as some cost savings for the state. Next slide, please.
Thank you. Potential capital maintenance incentive. This is another possibility. In the initial statewide facilities assessment, we have gathered both the observed remaining useful life and the calculated remaining useful life for the 16 major building systems that keep a school functional. Statewide, we've learned that on average, building systems have an observed remaining useful life that is greater than would be expected upon the manufacturer's expected useful life. That's not necessarily a good thing. It's out of necessity in order to keep those schools working, but we have systems that are at or past their expected life. They're harder to maintain. To incentivize LEAs that are keeping things working, a reward of a proportion of 1% additional to state funding for each 1% the facility's useful life has exceeded its expected life would help these LEAs by having some additional funding available to keep their schools operating reliably. In other words, a reward for those LEAs that are doing good planning. They have made those facilities go as long as they can. We really want each of the systems to get as much life as they can, and then to renew or replace the school. And we have some LEAs that are already have good planning and are doing this. And it would be a benefit for those LEAs. The incentive should be calculated on the over/under expected life of the school, where the funding is being requested for any type of project from systemic to replacement. Thank you. And that's the end of our presentation. We stand for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes, County Commissioner.
Thank you for this presentation. I think that everybody, local governments and the LEAs will certainly appreciate incentives. And I think incentives that reduce the cost of operations for energy and for maintenance are certainly appropriate to discuss. But I do have a couple questions for you, and I have 3 questions, so I'll ask all 3 of them, and then maybe you can answer them. So the first question is on the page 9, where you showed that it would cost $3.4 billion per year to sustain Maryland's portfolio, and that's local and state dollars combined. Do you know how much money we spend right now per year? Because I really don't have any idea how much is spent statewide on operations and routine maintenance, which would be in the LEA's budget. So I kind of wonder how far off we are in that. And then with the net zero, that's for new school construction, correct? Okay.
Not necessarily. I'll wait to answer the question.
Okay. And I assume I have actually looked at the total cost of ownership worksheet that you have now on the IAC, and I've looked at it with one of our schools in it, so I kind of have an understanding of how it works. So it's really based mostly on square footage. I mean, it is based on square footage. And so would the savings from the for the energy efficiency have to offset the total cost of ownership as proposed by the LEA versus state supported? the square footage differential if the school system has decided to build a bigger school, would it have to offset the square footage before there is a actual benefit from the assessment? So for instance, if we decide on our own dime that we're going to build space for English language learners, which is not currently cost shared with the state, okay, and we build that, so we build 4,000 square feet more, that will make our total cost of ownership be higher based on all the calculations. So we have to offset that square footage before we get the benefit of the energy assessment. And I guess the question on the maintenance side, I take this is for existing schools as well. And it is for existing schools. So if we look at our schools, we may find out that we have schools from the 50s that are actually require less maintenance than schools that were built in the 70s. It really depends on how that school was built and what choices were made at that time. So the maintenance may be higher in a school from the 70s than a school from the 50s. And so how does that work into it? So those are my questions. Thank you very much.
So I heard 4 questions.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought it was 3, but
That's
it
okay.
might be 5 by the time I'm done.
Well, you made some points in there I need to respond to.
Yeah.
But let's just go from the top on page 9 in the 3.4 billion. Alex, you have that handy. You had just worked that out the other day, and drawing from an annual report that's done annually that pulls from all of the states and what they report that they are spending on maintenance and operations and capital costs. We're able to really not only look at Maryland but other states and compare ourselves, which is helpful. Do you have that handy, Alex? What the difference is, the delta?
Well, I can say that it's been a real challenge to figure out exactly how much is being budgeted, much less spent by LEAs and the state, because LEAs account for their different types of spending, operations, maintenance, and capital in different ways. And I can't pull any conclusory figures on that. What I can say is that we're partway through the process of analyzing the budgeted numbers for every school district to find out what the budgeted amounts are for operations, maintenance, and capital, separate, 3 separate categories, in order to be able to then combine them and see where each LEA is against industry standards for maintaining their portfolios. Statewide share of construction projects, school construction, has averaged 31% over about the last decade. So 31% state, and 69% local funds, but that's just construction. It's not operations and maintenance. And because the O&M spending comes out through the school district's operating budgets, foundation formula based, that there's extra layers of complexity there that we haven't been able to tease out yet, but we're working on it. And we expect over the next few months to have a lot more information on budgets. Now, of course, spending is different. Not everything that's budgeted is spent. So that would be a second layer of analysis that we would like to do. Just haven't had the capacity to do it, but we're getting closer to that. But I think the takeaway on this is that, as a state, we're currently at about, I would estimate 71% of the industry standard for portfolio maintenance, including operations, capital, and maintenance side, about 71%. So there are consequences to that missing 29% in terms of facility condition, and that may help explain why our average age of square footage has been increasing bit by bit over the years. I know that that's not all the answer you were looking for, but that's as much as we have at this time.
Thank you, Alex. Ms. Gardner, did that cover it for now? And we can follow up with you.
That covers the question on number 9 on page 9.
Okay. The second one was about the incentive, and I think I heard it is gross square footage the only way that we can get there. What about net zero that we mentioned, and does it have to be new or renewed? I think those were wrapped together, and that might be why you thought there were. You said 3 questions, so I had broke them. Might as well put them back together. The gross square footage is one of the easiest ways, just like on vehicles that you drive, to be able to reduce your miles per gallon. You reduce the weight that you're having to push down the road and brake, and so all of your maintenance and everything else goes down. It's the same with school facilities, but it's absolutely not the only way to reduce your total cost of ownership. And net zero is one of those ways of reducing your total cost of ownership. It's hard to get to net zero without replacing a facility, and the people in the industry will explain that to you, but you can. It's a lot harder and maybe a lot more expensive, and why it's so important to look at everything in the total cost of ownership. If it's actually going to cost you a lot more to renovate a building than it would be to replace the building to get to that net zero and reduce your total cost of ownership, then you might want to, unless there's a historical reason, you might want to favor replacement of the school, which comes with all of the advantage of a shell of a facility, the outside parts of a facility that work so much better now, the windows, the walls, the roofs, how that we move air around. We have individual CO2 sensor tubes that go into rooms that sample the air, because that was the fault of just 10 years ago, being able to control ventilation in a room with individual CO2 sensors. They always broke. So we've learned past that. And to get to a net zero, you want to be able to minimize and only exchange air whenever you need to, and because you're just dumping heat out. So it's sophisticated. It's not an easy. It's an easy thing to do on a replacement. It's a lot harder to do on a renewal. But gross square footage is not the only way to get there. Net zero is absolute one of those things, but it's not the only way to get to a total cost of ownership either. There's the roof, everything about it. And it's not just that simple formula, Ms. Gardner, that you looked at. That's just the estimator. Whenever we look at the ed spec, we wanted to have a simple way to think about, because that's the point where the discussion is occurring with the educators, oftentimes the teachers and that. Right now, we know from the assessment that our average square foot class in Maryland is 756 square foot per student. And there's a lot of classrooms. I think if we look at the educational performance in those classrooms, that's pretty darn high. Some of those are in rural areas. And yet what has become the quasi standard to build for a classroom today, if you go to look at the latest architectural magazines that are copying from each other, it's 900 square feet or above. But is it needed? Only the local governance, the local educators can decide that. So we give them that kind of information because there is a benefit in generation of not only capital dollars, but operational dollars if the footprint can be reduced. And on the one point that you made in there as on the English second language learners, one of our first schools, and we've mentioned this, and it is in Comar, that the gross area baselines is not fixed. It's what we set as the area that we participate in, unless you can demonstrate that you need more. We don't ever want to build a school that doesn't work. That school, under the old baselines, they challenged us, and we said, absolutely, great. And the architect was just happy about that. You can go and watch the testimony of the IAC. He said, we're never asked to do that. But whenever we asked that, that's what we're trained to do in school. We worked with the teachers. We found ways of using space 2 and 3 times instead of just once, not just unique spaces. And that school is actually, it has a very high population, English second language learners. That was the reason they wanted more square footage. In fact, there was one piece of legislation that year prior that wanted to have the square footage of the school for the second language learners be the same as special ed, which is we start at 300. And we went through the whole process, ended up with a school that's actually is less second language learner, high percentage, and it's got a lower square foot per student than our gross area baselines today. They didn't need additional square footage. That was a local determination. And that's how it needs to be each and every time whenever a school is designed. They're the ones that use it. And the school, a lot of people have visited and talked to the teachers and found that it's pretty darn good. It's working and everybody's happy, especially the community. I need to mention that they had planned to add on to that school for square footage. But after they look at the total cost of ownership, they decided, my gosh, we're going to have to pay more money even locally up front in order to replace the school. but it's going to be worth it to us. And that's what the local county governance decided to support the local Board of Education in that decision. So anyway, it's a complex project, but all of these things can be looked at together. They definitely require the architect and the engineers to put the information down. Let's put it on the paper. Let's put our cards on the table and everybody look at it together.
All right. Actually, I've got to interject here. We have 2 more presentations and we have other people that have questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Can you get in writing to County Executive Gardner any other answers to questions that she had?
The last one was a maintenance incentive, and very quickly, that maintenance incentive is, and probably for her accounting more than any others, they've taken the view of trying to get the most out of a facility and not nickel and dime it and band-aid it along the way, and then replace them because of all the advantages I just talked about on the earlier one. So yes, there's a lot of ways to get to that maintenance incentive, and I'd absolutely would call you and visit with you.
And I'd ask you to follow up with the county executive.
Will do.
All right.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Willis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can take my question offline and send it directly to Bob and to Alex and to Cassandra, and then maybe they can copy some other people on the answer.
Okay.
I'm fine.
I'm just worried about time.
I understand.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Let's move to Michael Rubenstein, Principal Policy Analyst for the Department of Legislative Services. Always good to have you. There you are.
Thank you. Good to
Michael.
be here. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm going to be talking about the local share revolving loan fund, which we presented about a couple of sessions back. And these are some draft recommendations, decision points that we've come up with for your consideration. I don't know if you want me to run through them all, Madam Chair, or take them one at a time.
Yeah, just run through them all fairly.
Okay.
Good. Yeah.
So the first one is to rename the fund and clarify in the statute that the funds can be used for both local and state shares for forward funding. The current name of the fund and also some provisions in the statute itself limit it to just using it for the local share. And in talking with some of the LEAs, they've indicated that in order to move some of these projects forward, they would need some flexibility to use that money for the state share as well. So that would be the first one. The one is to recommend that $50 million in PAYGO be put into the fund to capitalize the fund in 2023. We're not sure that level of funding will be used in that first year, but since it's a special fund, it can stay there until it's ready to be used. And then we're not sure again in terms of ongoing needs, because as you see later on, we talk about the fund being repaid over several years. If there's a high demand in the first year and in the second year, there may need to be a second allocation in 2024, but that could be something that could be taken up through the budget process at the time. So the recommendation is just for 2023, $50 million one time. And then we anticipate those loan repayments eventually will be able to sustain ongoing needs. Third one is to have the IAC determine the eligibility. That's already in the statute, but based on the statutory criteria, we think that they should give priority to counties that are not able to forward fund due to limited debt capacity and other reasons. So that would be that. Fourth one is to require repayment. As I indicated, this is one where you might have a choice. So the first option is to require repayment with no interest within 3 years of the loan disbursement. So once the loan is given out, they would have 3 years to pay it back. Now, typically, there's about a 1 or 2 year lag from the time a project is approved to when the state funding comes through for it. So typically, the counties would have money coming in from the IAC to pay back that loan within that 3 year period. But there is a possibility that some of that money may be delayed. And so the other option is just to tie it to the actual receipt of the funding from the state. And that would give them 1 year from when they actually receive the money from the state to pay back the loan. So in case there's any kind of delay in the money from the state coming through for a project, they wouldn't be stuck having to start repayments before they're ready to. And then the last one would be to allow the loan funds to be available to support both the CIP projects and the Built to Learn projects. As you know, the Built to Learn does have the cost share requirement also, and this would give them the option to use the loan funds for either one. And there will be a number of projects that use funds from both sources. So this would help make it not too complicated for them to carry that out.
Yeah, if I,
Recommendations.
yeah, if I might speak to this, because I would like to, I'd hope to take a vote on this today. This is something that we've talked about. Actually, it was talked about as early as 2 years ago in the Knott Commission, and that just never was acted on. And I think this is a well thought out and good proposal that will allow counties greater flexibility, particularly those that do not have the money to forward fund. I mean, that's basically what holds up projects, and then their monies end up getting recycled, or needed projects don't move forward. So this is a fund that could be set up. And I will also say that this would be a recommendation to the Budget and Tax and to Appropriations Committee. I will also say that in the early discussions of what we hope and want to do with the unusual but great circumstance we find ourselves in this year with a surplus, we are looking to find some one-time only expenditures to expend some of this money on. This is a perfect example of how we could commit $50 million this year. So are there any questions about this proposal? If not, this is one item here that I would like to take a vote on today, if it's at all possible. Any questions? Anybody have a question? I don't see any hands.
I do. I do.
Okay,
Chair
yes.
Carter. Okay,
Yes,
I have a couple of comments, Madam Chair, and I can make these very quick. Originally, the revolving loan fund was an idea that I suggested back on the Knott Commission.
right.
And the idea was to help counties who could not forward fund state share. So I think in number one, the priority should be given to forward funding state share. I do agree with the $50 million recommendation. We had done some homework and looked at the 16 smaller counties who are generally those who cannot forward fund, and looked at a 10-year data point, and we were going to suggest between $50 and $60 million. Now, I would note that's just homework we've done here in Frederick County. I have not shared that yet with the other counties.
Mhm.
And I think in number three, I would suggest that those have not forward funded in recent years. And I would also suggest those that do not have debt capacity and can show that they don't have the debt capacity would be important there. My biggest comment is on number 4 with the 3 years of loan disbursement. I think that's too short. And looking at 10 years of data for 16 counties, the state payback ranges between 4 and 6 years. It's been as long as 6 years for high schools. That's a specific example from Allegheny County when they built a high school, and Allegheny County is a county that could not really afford the forward funding. And so I think that the repayment should be that the state reimbursement, the timing of the state reimbursement is the timing of the repayment. So those are my comments. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, look, they're very substantive, and I want to include as much as possible your comments and concerns in on this particular item of the local. So let me do this. Michael, you and commission and the county executive and I are going to have a conversation, if you will, before our next meeting, and let's see if we can't blend, if you will, what she has done in terms of her data collection from the counties with your recommendations.
Yeah, it's pretty close, Madam Chair.
I know.
Yeah, I think these are to some extent, some of her comments are already reflected, but we can certainly have that conversation.
Yeah, why don't we do that? Because there was enough there that I just want to make sure I understand where the county executive, and then I think, obviously 12-1, we can take a quick vote on this just to make sure we're all together. So I wanted to take a vote on it, but I really want to clearly understand the county commissioner's points. Okay. Any other questions? I do want to tell the work group, this is a great year for us to be able to do this. And I think 24 will be another great year, FY 24, for us to do this if it's needed. And I do think it's very important to establish this in a way that we can, it'll be a revolving fund. It will hopefully really moving forward help a lot of counties in the state. Thank you. Okay, we're going to now move to facilities.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I am driving down 270. I apologize.
Oh my
I'm
goodness.
not there. It's Nancy.
I know who it is. We recognize you.
I'm really sorry. I just
That's okay.
misjudged my day. But I just want to say that I think my recollection from the NOC Commission, the points that the county executive just raised, including looking at the forward funding of the state and not just local funds, were really very important. And I don't know whether I'm going to be there next time, but just want to go on record saying I agree with you, Madam Chairman. This revolving fund is terribly important. It can make a huge difference, and we want to do it right and take advantage of the golden opportunity.
Right. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we're hopeful I think it's December 1st.
Okay.
You should be here. All right, Treasurer.
Okay.
All right.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you. And be safe driving. All right. Facilities assessment decision discussion. Okay.
Thanks,
Revolving.
Madam Chair. Dana, can you move to the next slide? So in your materials, DLS as staff, we tried to synthesize a lot of the comments you guys have all brought up about the facilities assessment into some decision points to talk about now and possibly vote on at the December 1st meeting. Dana, can you move it to the next slide in the PDF? Okay, well, you all should have a copy. So we're going to go through those. We have the IAC here if you want to ask them questions about that, how this would look. We were hoping you guys could have some discussion and flesh some of these ideas out to start voting at the next meeting. So the first thing is any changes in the assessment. In looking at the data, it's been brought up that certain sufficiency standards weren't collected in the assessment, and this work group might want to recommend that they be included in the next round of assessments. A fourth of the schools will be assessed every year, and so if you make recommendations on changes, that could start being incorporated into all the assessments moving forward. So some things that we as DLS presented on at the last meeting and things that you guys yourselves had pointed out were humidity, temperature, CO2 levels, lead paint, asbestos, kitchen sanitary equipment, acoustics, lighting, emergency communication systems, and health room attributes. Again, you might want to consider recommending these or at least asking the IAC for their comments on how expensive this would be or what that would look like in an actual assessment. DLS has also pointed out in our presentations that the lack of a building system or asset in a school was not captured in the assessment data. So that may be something the work group may want to also recommend in future assessments. And then the third point on additional data collection was anything else that you guys may want to consider. So it's been brought up, lab space has been brought up, safety equipments for labs has been brought up as an option, technology and computer science spaces, portable water, and a way to capture maintenance data. So these concerns have been raised by you guys as members. On the next page, next slide, thank you. 1B is to clearly identify ways LEAs can be more involved to create a better data set. So we propose three options here, three requirements here, which is the IAC could create a process for LEA reassessment of a school if there are issues or discrepancies or concerns. Require LEAs to be present for an assessment, require LEAs to tell contractors and the IAC certain information about buildings prior to assessments, and any additional requirements that you guys may want to consider recommending for the LEA involvement in the assessment. 1C is something that as staff, we've been looking at and how it's being captured in the data, and based on your conversations, if the data reflects what the members as a work group intend to be collected from the assessment. So right now, the functionality of an asset is reflected in the RUL, the remaining useful life calculation. But in the discussions we've had as a work group, a number of you have raised concerns that if a building system isn't functioning, that is concerning to you. So we want to make sure that is clear in future data collection. So 1C is, should the assessment capture a non-functioning asset or building system? And these are 3 options. So yes, capture the functionality of all building systems and assets, which may be very complicated. So you may want to consider number 2, which is yes, capture the functionality of certain building systems and rely on remaining useful life determination for other building systems. We have the 17 building systems list, so you may want to consider certain building systems on that list as a priority in capturing their functionality, like HVAC, life safety building systems, or roofs. That might be the middle ground there. Or 3, rely on the remaining useful life assessment in determining the functionality of a system or asset. And then the last recommendation related to changes in the assessment collection would be to require the IAC to publish the educational sufficiency standards and regulation, just for transparency. Madam Chair, I don't know if you want to take questions or discussion on each of these as we go or at the end. You're on mute, Madam Chair.
I'm on mute. Are there any questions? Any questions? I don't see any, so move on.
Okay. The second piece that you may want to consider recommendations on is the MDCI. 2A would be to require the IAC to publish the MDCI and regulations. You want to consider for the work group if that should be by a certain date or it should be prior to use and funding decisions. As the work group, you've seen the draft IAC proposed categories. So this would just provide some accountability before they start using the MDCI. And then 2B is to require the MDCI to include certain priorities and certain categories. Again, we've only looked at a draft categorization. I think we've wanted as a work group for you to have discussions about your priorities, but because DLS still hasn't received the most up-to-date data set, we haven't been able to present those hypotheticals to you. So you might not be at the place to do 2B, but we could just include your intent in the report or the intent in statute based on 2B, what priorities you think are important so that when the IAC does or if they publish regulations, they could be in compliance with the work group's intent. Are there any questions about the MDCI?
Any questions about, yes, County Commissioner Gardner.
I just think that it's premature for us to be publishing MDCI and regulation because to the best of my knowledge, no one has seen MDCIs yet. So if the work group certainly wants to publish a report with priorities for categories, I think, that discussion is fine, but I really don't think we should put something in regulation about something we haven't seen yet. I'm just uncomfortable with that personally.
Yeah, I think the recommendation is that because the MDCI could be used in funding decisions, which is later in the document, that it probably falls under what should be required to be in regulation. So this would be something an agency should be doing in their best practices of publishing things like this in regulation. So that way the AELR committee can meet to see if it complies with the intent of the law, and there's just all those checks on them using the MDCI.
But it doesn't actually publish the MDCI now, does it?
No, as the work group, you could recommend that prior to use in any funding decision, so before FY25, or if you decide to push the timing out later, the IAC has to publish in regulation the MDCI. That way, it's not just posted on the IAC's website as guidelines, it's actually in COMAR.
That County Executive, that's a little bit more clear and makes more sense, doesn't it? So prior to them releasing this, they have to adopt regulations.
I'll have to talk about this with others. I'm not sure I I am on board yet, but thank you.
Okay. That's fine.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Madam Chair, one other option would be to sort of twofold, to not allow them to implement MDCI until it has been published in regulation, which is, I think, what Michelle was trying to articulate. And then two, to not allow them to publish them until a certain date. So a little twist on what Michelle was saying, but essentially they couldn't publish them until no sooner than pick your date.
Right. Yeah, that's what I heard Michelle say, so I was saying, well, that's, good. So let's just make sure again, county executive, this is why we're doing this today, so you get a comfort level. Okay, want to go to master facility?
Yeah, so the master facility library, as DLS presented at the last meeting, hasn't been implemented. Kind of similar to what Rachel just said, one recommendation is the IAC would not be authorized to use the assessment data in any funding decisions until the IAC has created the integrated data system for the assessment data, including the preventive maintenance schedules where all the details are accessible to LEAs. That was the intent in the not commissioned bill. And then 3B was any other recommendations you may have related to the library.
Okay. Any questions, comments on that? Okay.
Number 4 is the use of the assessment. So in bold at the top is the decision you all made at the last meeting, was that no data from the assessment may be used for funding decisions by the IAC until at least FY25. So there are a couple of pieces based on that decision that you guys need to make. So the priority fund receives funding in FY25, and the purpose is to address facility needs of the highest priority in the state. So options 1 through 3 are different options you can take, which is the work group could leave the statute as is. It's a little vague, but you could choose to leave it as is. The work group could decide in more detail the overall intent of the priority fund, or the work group could clearly define what the highest priority in the state means, which could be schools at the top of the MDCI list, schools that fall within the top MDCI category, or systems identified in the assessment. Again, I think we thought at this point we would have the data to help you make that decision a little more. So you might not be able to do number 3 yet. And again, you're welcome to keep the statute as is.
Right.
Decision point 4 in this is what date should the priority fund begin? Rachel is going to discuss this.
There's a separate document that you have in your packet. It's the last page of the PDF. Dana, if you could go to the very last page. And essentially, one more. But basically, there you go. We have this chart that we put together to try to help you all visualize what's going on with the various funding sources for public school facilities. So at the top are 2 programs that we've talked about a couple of times in the work group. The Enrollment Growth and Relocatable Classroom Program, which is EGRC, and the Healthy School Facility Fund, or HSFF. And under both of those programs have existed for several years now. And for the next fiscal 22 is our current fiscal year. So for this year and out until fiscal 26, the mandated funding in the statute for EGRC is $40 million. And you can see a parallel there that the Healthy School Facility Fund funding was increased for fiscal 23 and 24 to 40 million. So they're both funded at the same level in 23 and 24. And then starting in fiscal 27, EGRC grows to $80 million is the funding mandate. I do want to point out that there in this current year and prior years, the General Assembly sometimes adds more money to these programs. So this is not reflecting the actual amount that they're receiving in fiscal 22. It's the mandated amount. And then you can see that below the HSFF is the priority fund, which is the new fund that was created to address the highest priorities from the school facilities assessment. And the priority fund is currently mandated funding of $40 million beginning in fiscal 25, as Michelle said. And so it stays at that $40 million level in 25 and 26. And it's essentially absorbing the Healthy School Facility Fund. So the Healthy School Facility Fund would not receive funding anymore. That money basically moves to the priority fund. And then starting in fiscal 27, the mandate grows to 80 million, which is parallel to the increase in the funding mandate for the enrollment growth and relocatable classrooms program. All of this was part of the Built to Learn Act, with obviously some pieces of it were well informed by the not commissioned legislation. And then below the priority fund is two programs that have been around. Well, Aging Schools has been around for decades. School safety is a more recent program, but both of those programs are currently being funded 10 million per year for school safety and about 6.1 million per year for aging schools. The statute has those programs essentially phasing out beginning in fiscal 27, so that, and again, the priority fund absorbs those programs as well, as those needs would be addressed, particularly school safety. Hopefully, most of those needs would have been addressed by then, and then it would just be the ongoing needs. And then at the very bottom is the revolving loan fund program that we just talked about, Michael Rubenstein. About, and then just so that to put them all on the sheet, we also have the regular capital improvement program, CIP funding, which has been at least 250 million a year for quite a while now, and the new Built to Learn program is obviously also a very large potential funding source. So the big question, I think, for the work group is to determine when the school facility assessment data, when you're comfortable with the data being used to actually make funding allocations, and whether that is fiscal 25, as you've discussed previously, or whether you want to tie that to something like you want to have a full, complete 4-year cycle of the school facility assessment data available to be used to run this statewide list and determine allocations. In which case, fiscal 25 would be a little early. It would probably be fiscal 27 before you would be able to have a full 4 year, we have our baseline data, and then we would need our 4 years of updated data to get through all of the schools in the state. And so you might want to consider not doing that until fiscal 27. And if that was the case, you could think about, as you can see, essentially Healthy School Facility Fund money was moved into the priority fund. So you could, if you went that direction, you could keep funding the Healthy School Facility Fund for an additional 1 or 2 years until the priority fund is ready to be used.
And that would also, if I might, if we did this, it could also mean that this full 4 years of data collection can include some of the things that we feel have been omitted, or that the LEAs feel have been omitted. Am I correct?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I can tell you, we don't need to vote on this today. I'm cognizant of the fact we have a couple of members that are absent, but I will tell, we can discuss, anybody can discuss this with staff or with me during the, before December 1st, but I feel very comfortable moving that date, extending the priority fund, knowing that this next 4 years of data collection will it will satisfy, I think, the bigger picture of facilities issues that some of us felt was needed. Okay. Any other comments, questions about the presentation?
I'm sure we have a couple more points. This was
Okay.
just the timing point. So if you go back 2 slides, Dana or Jeannie, 4B is to be clear about the work group's intent about the use of assessment data. So we've proposed 4B, which is authorize IAC to use certain data from the assessment for other IAC programs in certain fiscal years. I think it's just clear. I think it's just important for this work group to be clear about when and where the IAC can use the assessment data, if not for the priority fund. So the first recommendation would be to require the IAC to adopt regulations if they want to use assessment data in any other funding decisions. You could also prohibit the IAC from using assessment data in other programs until a certain fiscal year, or authorize or prohibit the use of assessment data if not related to funding.
Okay, those are 3 options that we need to, again, decide before December 1. Any comments on those? If you want to more fully understand the implications of those, again, please feel free to call Michelle or Rachel, and we will try to walk you through those different decisions. Anything else?
There's one more, which is about the future of this work group. That's the last page.
Yeah.
This work group should decide the future of this work group, which could be to extend the work group until funding decisions are made with assessment data. You could let the work group lapse and then require the IAC to submit certain documents to the budget process and publish their regulations that would keep accountability of the rollout of the assessment. Or 3, require a new work group to be appointed a year before the assessment results could be used in funding decisions. So those are your 3 options for the future of this work group.
Well, I certainly think that I don't think we should, I certainly think that we shouldn't be meeting until there's data to meet about. So my gut says that we, and this is just my thinking, we can talk through it. Other members, please call me if you have any concerns or a different opinion, that we probably should just require the IAC to provide the Appropriations and Budget Tax Committee certain data and reports to keep the members of those committees up to date. And I see Delegate Corman has joined us. Thank you.
Just in time to ask or make a point, Madam Chair, if that's okay.
That's absolutely fine.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to suggest that a JCR combined with, I don't think it's going to be a problem to get the House side anyway to commit to doing a meeting or a hearing through the committee process, just to make sure that things are moving in the right direction, that we don't sort of walk away for 3 years and then come back and realize all the things that we've been talking about aren't getting done. But I think we can do that through the regular committee process with BNT and your committee.
But certainly this work group does not need to continue meeting or continue. It's, we need to develop, I think, a process that there's oversight for BNT and appropriations that we feel comfortable with. Does that help, Michelle, Rachel? Okay. Any other comments? was there an area that we need to address on, county, state cost share?
Yeah, so the next meeting, we're going to bring forward decision points related to that work group charge.
Okay, good. All right. Anything else we're going to bring forward next meeting? Or is
Madam
that-
Chair, I have a question. On this decision points related to school facility assessment and the first item, and it looks like maybe several others that you were asking for some additional information back from us, like what would this cost? What other ways could we use the data as possibilities so that you can consider them? Did you want anything from the IC on any of that?
No?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. What else besides county, state cost share?
We're going to finish the revolving loan fund decision points. We're going to see how many of decision points we can get through in this document, and then gross area baselines. We need to start having that conversation.
Right. Okay. Good. All right. If there's nothing else, I'll see everybody December 1st, and the treasurer of the state of Maryland, the Honorable Nancy Kopp, will still be with us. Okay.
Yes, ma'am, I'll be there.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody.
Everybody have a nice Thanksgiving.
Yeah, please
you.
do.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.